We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. When I first discovered Unitarian Universalism, I learned that I was a sinner, and that was a great relief. At 24, when I found my spiritual home here in our faith, and up to that point, all the messages that I had gotten about what it meant to make a mistake or to do wrong were simply things that I had gotten not through any formal teaching, but just through the interaction with our culture. And by 24, I knew I had already made some pretty serious mistakes. And as far as I could tell, I was condemned. And then I came into my first congregation, and I learned that the word sin comes from the archery term, which means simply to miss the mark. And I participated in our first service of Yom Kippur, that highest of holy days which my home congregation marked each year. Each year we would read Rob Eller Isaac's Litany of Forgiveness. Then it was a reading in our gray hymnal. Now it is the hymn that we sang for our meditation. We would have a member of our congregation who would sound the shofar for us each year, and a cantor would sing the Kol Nidre, a version of which we heard so beautifully presented a few moments ago. At some level, beyond words, my unchurched, confused, and often struggling self would emerge from that service every year, a little more whole, a little less afraid, a little bit more at one with the world. Atonement. Simply put, it can be read as at one-ment. And each year at Yom Kippur, we would speak about the necessity of coming back to not an easy understanding with the places that you have missed the mark, but a harder understanding which comes from really being willing to face those places where we have fallen short inevitably and where we then agree to begin anew. Atonement is being at one or at peace with the reality of our experience, making a true confession of where we've made mistakes or caused pain, and then taking the steps to make amends so that we can move forward. Yom Kippur was celebrated last week around the world, and somehow that story of redemption after worshiping the false idol like the golden calf really resonated with me this year. That the world could be reclaimed again after such a mistake. In our world, we are seeing every day the effects of what it means to not be able to admit that you have made mistakes. We live in times which values lying to have a false aura of purity over telling the truth and owning up and allowing people to assess and move forward. To do what the Jewish tradition tells us is tikkun olam, the repair of the world. Too often we hold ourselves hostage to our own beliefs about what we should do. And I believe that fuels this culture of dishonesty and distortion and lies and cover-ups. We're seeing so much every day, all around us. A major political figure wrote a book not too long ago, and the title was actually No Apology. It was an autobiography, No Apology. Think about that. The online forum, The Daily Cause, noticed that we have a whole art form now in non-apology apologies emerging around us. There is the conditional non-apology apology. I am sorry if I offended someone. There is the justifying non-apology. My remarks were off the record. There is the apology that shifts the blame to someone else. While I apologize for insulting your mother, I would like to remind you that you insulted my mother last week. There is the non-apology that justifies because of good intention, and this one is very prevalent. It was not my intention to fill in the blank. These are the words we hear every day. And how different they are from the spirit which Rabbi Michael Lerner of Tikkun magazine would summon us to, who asks us all, including all of us who have taken positions of leadership, to atone for a very long list of the sins of humanity, including the following: the sin of those of us in the West who are hoarding the world's wealth and not sharing it with the billions of others who inhabit our planet and who live on less than $2 a day. For the sin of supporting forms of globalization that are destructive to nature and also to the economic well-being of the powerless. For the sin of all who have become so concerned with making it and becoming wealthy that they have pursued strategies to do this that were destructive not only to their own interests, but to those of the entire society. And for the sin of blaming all representatives of some group for the extremism of a few and ignoring the violence and extremism emanating from our own society, which continues to kill people suspected of being involved in supporting acts against us. For the sin of being cynical about the possibility of building a world based on love. Those are some of the larger sins that Rabbi Lerner would have us take up, but we all know that we have things that we do well, and we have things in places where we don't do so well, where we miss the mark. And not acknowledging, not looking, not asking ourselves to truly apologize. Not one of those non-apology apologies, but truly to look at what we did means that we cannot actually move on. Forgiveness, our need to forgive others, and perhaps most difficult, our need to forgive ourselves, is among the most ancient of spiritual disciplines. In the Buddhist tradition, we see this in the old story of the two monks who are crossing a river when they encounter a beautiful young woman who is also trying to cross but is afraid of the current. So the elder monk picks her up and carries her across the river and then sets her down while the younger one looks on in disbelief, for it is well known that monks are not to carry women. They walk on for a while in silence, and then afterward, the younger monk can no longer hold his anger, and he chides the older one for breaking this sacred taboo. And in this apocryphal story, the older is said to look at the younger and say, "My dear brother, I set that woman down long ago. It is you who is still carrying her." We all know this. Without forgiveness, our energy is spent on separating and dividing. In the mid-90s, I learned I was a sinner, and I was glad, because it meant there was a way to go on. I was just another person who missed the mark, and I could admit that and move forward. But today, in the middle of this decade, I see leader after leader cover up rather than atone, and that these are the models that our children have of who is shaping their world breaks my heart. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. Yesterday in his seminar with us, David Rico spoke about the difference between pardoning someone and forgiving them. A pardon, he said, is a technical act, like a legal pardon. But forgiveness requires that we touch something unknowable, something that's larger than ourselves, that speaks to a truth that we actually have yet to realize. Buddhist teacher and author Tara Brach says, "It is a universal condition to harden and protect and armor ourselves against harm. Forgiveness takes us beyond the fight, flight, freeze response to open us up to the vulnerability of living." We all know that if we are unable to forgive others, it means we tie the energy of our lives up into knots, devoting it primarily to promoting division. to acknowledge the places where we have fallen short or missed the mark, allows us to make amends and then move on. But the hardest is that part. We forgive ourselves and each other. It's the we forgive ourselves. It is a life challenge for us to find the resources to forgive ourselves and to recognize that we too have done real harm, perhaps not with intention, perhaps not even with knowing, but this is truly part of the human experience. And the Kol Nidre acknowledges that as well. Perhaps for just a moment, you would allow your heart to touch a place where you have not forgiven yourself. Most likely you will not want to linger there too long because it's too tender, it's too painful, it's too real. But without forgiveness, we spend our energy defending that place, armoring ourselves, and keeping others and the rest of our lives at bay. And without that, we cannot do the work of connecting, uniting, and co-creating. Think for a moment about a relationship you have lost because you weren't able to forgive, or someone was not able to forgive you. Allow yourself, for just a moment, to touch that deep well of pain and to know the cost of that separation. And then imagine for a minute what our world could look like if we could take the spirit of Kol Nidre deeply into our hearts. And in the spirit of this season of atonement, I invite you to consider these questions. What is out of alignment in my closest relationships? Where have I fallen short in my dealings with those who walk in the same worlds as I? Where did I fall short in my responsibilities to my own health, to my own well-being? Where have I failed to pay attention to my needs to grow and learn, my needs to connect to a larger frame of life beyond my own needs and wants? How did I invest time in nurturing my relationship with what I hold holy and sacred? Where have I given real life energy to tikkun olam, the healing of the world? Where have I challenged injustice? Where have I done too little when I could have done more? Where did I not pay attention to the growing numbers of those among us who do not have the means to live? Where did I try to take the values of love and unity into the world? The purpose is, again, not to name our sins as much as it is to look at them, so that we may go forward anew, forgiving ourselves and each other, and beginning again in love. And in doing so, working for a world where we write the words of offense in sand and the words of gratitude in stone, where we release the false vows and take up the simple and humble ones, where we celebrate the spirit of life which calls to us across culture and background and being. Forgiveness allows us to lay our burdens down, to be glad sinners and gladder workers, repairers of our hearts and repairers of the world. forgiveness allows us to engage truly with one another and to change our common story.